the Big Six declaration and joint position piece that you've indicated did get derailed a little bit around implementation because of COVID, understandably. Yep. Is there anything from a policy or a government perspective or a funding perspective that would make or help make that a reality in Australia? I guess what I'm saying is, what is needed in Australia to help make that a reality?
Yeah. So I see a number of pieces there. So the APEC summit that was going to occur last year that didn't occur for obvious reasons around COVID actually had non-formal education on the cards.
Okay.
And therefore, obviously, our representatives of government around the world within that were going to be talking about it. So we've provided some advice to that, but obviously that didn't go ahead for good reason. So hopefully that stays on the agenda.
Yep.
And that's a key piece, because that becomes an international piece of conversation. As you mentioned, Big Six have this international agreement. In many ways, we then need to localise that here in Australia.
Yep.
Now, there's a level of working together around that, but as we said, COVID has disrupted that slightly. So we do need to come back and put some more effort into that at this point. A lot of that is around policy.
Right.
A lot of that policy piece at the moment, the Australian qualifications framework is under review. How qualifications are developed in the vocational education and training sector is under review. Standards within vocational education and training and in higher education, that is the university sector, are under review. All of that's a good thing, that they're all under review. The trend, however, in Australia has been that we've got reports going back over the last 10 years and longer, but particularly even within the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot of reports that have said that industry wants more recognition processes. We don't want to go off and do a course and that's how people get to their formal outcomes. There's skilled people out there that we need to recognise them better.
Yep.
Totally agree. The funding mechanisms that we have in Australia, there's a lot of training that relies on government funding in one way, shape or another. Recognition of prior learning is a bit more complex than so the assessment of recognition of prior learning is a little bit more complex than a training and assessment pathway. If we have provided the training, been assessing them along the way, and so formative and summative assessment along the way, and we've concluded the course, here's your qualification, that assessment in many ways is very predictable, very easy, because we have clear curriculum, clear coursework we're working with. The recognition of prior learning is a bit more complex because people can present with anything. However, the funding mechanisms have said, oh, if you're only assessing, then we won't pay you as much because you're only assessing, you're not training and assessing.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Right.
So as a result, that in itself as a funding mechanism has encouraged many training providers in the formal sector to encourage their students away from a recognition-only pathway to into a training and assessment pathway. And so in Australia, we've got the National Centre for Vocational Education Research, who put out reports every year. NCVR data is fantastic and has been showing a great decline consistently with the number of recognition of prior learning outcomes. Meanwhile, the number of reports saying that we need more recognition has been growing. So funding mechanism doesn't help that.
Yeah.
I said earlier that informal which is where I sort of bring my learning from everywhere, regardless of what it is, can be complex and has lots of information. And how do I represent that? And how do I show that? That's difficult for assessors. It's difficult for the students too.
Yep.
Because I'm trying to pull bits and pieces together from everywhere.
Yep.
When we utilise non-formal, then we're able to go, right, well, we know there's a clear pathway, a clear program. We know what it aligns to. Even my example earlier of the Scouts Youth Program, which is more open-ended, we still have some clear guidelines around it. So therefore, recognition of prior learning is easier for both the participant and the assessor. I'm not saying it's a walk in the park, but it is certainly easier than taking more of an informal learning and try to pull all that together and turn that into a formal outcome.
Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
So that's how non-formal can actually fit in nicely. Talking industry now, so forget community organisations and youth programs, talking industry, and I'll use the US as an example because they really don't have a national qualifications framework, and they have states doing their own thing, and in some cases counties doing their own thing, and they have industry bodies doing their own thing. And the amount of credentials in the marketplace in the USA is enormous. And the last count I heard, I cannot remember the numbers, but it was scary.
It was, according to Credential Engine in 2020, I think it was something like 1 million credentials were out there.
Yeah. So it's, how do you interpret all of that? What does this credential say that I can manage a team mean versus that credential that says I can manage a team? It gets really tricky. Now, all right, we're lucky here, and in many countries where we have a national qualifications framework, we've even got, particularly within the vet sector, we've got clearly defined unit of competency requirements publicly available.
Yep.
So you can compare that non-formal workshop you did as part of your work, or that internal training that with clearly defined outcomes, that it was part of your workplace training, you can easily compare that against the requirements of the formal outcome.
Yep.
Now, you might do 3 pieces of workplace training, clearly defined outcomes, clear information, you have to do certain things to meet the requirements of that internal training. You might have to do 3 different things to meet the requirements of a unit of competency, which is only one component of a qualification. But you've got the ability to look at that non-formal education and line it up against formal, and therefore have something that stacks towards a formal outcome. So that's a significant part of how we can use the non-formal to get to formal. Those national qualification frameworks are a key part of that.
Yep.
So without that, then what are we actually stacking against? And it might be internal outcomes we're stacking against, but you know, it's still to make transferability, so I can leave one company and go to another company. Knowing a national system that I'm stacking against makes sense. Or
at least some framework alignment.
Yes.
No matter what that is. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree 100%. Thank you for breaking that down for us. That was really, really clear, and also an important distinction and an important walkthrough. So thanks, Jeffrey. I appreciate that.
No,